Because what I see a lot is people try to say, well, you should define your positioning, and that positioning should drive the product strategy. And you know what? That might be true if we're talking about consumer products or other kind of products that I don't work on. But if we're talking about enterprise technology, I don't believe that positioning drives product strategy. That is actually the tail wagging the dog, if you know what I mean. Like so here's the way I look at this. In most technology companies, what we have is a vision for the product, a vision of what that thing is going to look like in the future.
Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode. Today I'm really happy because I'm with April Dunford. April, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Most people listening to this should know who you are, but maybe for those who don't, can you give a brief intro?
Sure. So my background is I started out in product marketing, and then I spent 25 years of my career as kind of a repeat vice president of marketing at a series of venture-backed startups. I think I did 7 in total. And then about 8 years ago, I made the switch to consulting. And what I do now is very specific. So I only do positioning work for B2B technology companies, and mainly companies that are in the enterprise software space. So, things that are tricky enough that it requires a sales team to get it sold. So nothing with a zero touch sales model. Um, yeah, and I've been doing that for about 8 years. I wrote a couple of books. So I wrote a book on positioning called Obviously Awesome. A lot of people know that book. Recently, I released a second book that is specifically about how to take that positioning and translate it into a sales pitch. And that book is called Sales Pitch. So that's me.
Awesome, that's awesome. I have one question about your introduction because, as you mentioned, obviously Awesome become quite popular. And to me, what's surprising is that coming from the marketing side, you were very popular in the product rounds. So, is there any way that happened? Any purposeful way,
Yeah.
or?
Well, I do think I consider myself kind of a product marketer. Like, I mean, marketers come in all kinds of flavors. Because I came up through engineering, like I went to school for engineering. I studied systems design engineering in university. So I always kind of consider myself a product marketer. Positioning is typically considered a product marketing job in some ways. Although, I have opinions about that. I think that product marketers need to be the stewards of positioning, but they can't be the only one involved in actually doing positioning. But I think, my stuff tends to resonate with the product marketers a lot. And so, there's kind of a blurry line between product management and product marketing, and those things get lumped together a lot. So, yeah, I think that's how the product people know me. I don't know. I think I kind of come from that side of the house a little bit.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And actually, that's a good intro to the topics I want to discuss with you today, because I want to discuss about the connection between positioning and product strategy. So maybe before jumping directly into that, can you give us a brief intro to how you describe positioning?
It's a good question because, as the positioning consultant, it's kind of funny. Like, people come to me and they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "Oh, I do positioning work." And then, they either have no idea what positioning is, or they think they know what positioning is, and they're wrong. So,
As a
so a
product
lot of people
strategy
will,
consultant, I can relate to that.
yeah. So, yeah, I bet. So a lot of folks will come and say positioning, it's exactly like messaging. And I'm like, well, no, like I actually think messaging comes after positioning. Like it's an input to messaging, but it's not the same thing. Or people will say, well, positioning is just about coming up with a tagline. I'm like, nah, actually that's copywriting and that's different. The one that really bugs me is when people talk about brand positioning. And I hate that because I think there's brand positioning, there's branding, there's positioning. Those two things are actually really separate. Like we should keep them separate. And in my opinion, your positioning is an input to branding. Like we kind of need to know what the positioning is before we can figure out the branding that represents that positioning. So in my world, positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at delivering something like some value, that there's a well-defined set of customers that care a lot about that value. So in my world, positioning defines, well, what are the competitive alternatives to what I do? What do I got that's different from those alternative ways of solving the problem? What is the value I can deliver that no other product can? And then what's my definition of a customer that really, really cares a lot about that value? And then the last piece is, what is the market category I intend to dominate? So positioning defines those five things. Those five things are an input to almost everything we do in marketing and sales. I can't build messaging without understanding that. I can't do branding without understanding that. I can't do lead generation without understanding that. I can't build a sales pitch without understanding, these five things, which essentially define why pick us over the other guys, which is pretty important to sales.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's this kind of foundational underpinning to almost everything we're doing in marketing and sales.
Yeah, that's a very good starting point to my next question, because you mentioned how positioning is an input for so many things. And how do you feel about the product work and in particular product strategy? Yeah, I don't want to bias you too much with my question, but how do you see the relationship between the two?
I think this is really poorly understood. So I'm glad you asked this question, because what I see a lot is people try to say, well, you should define your positioning, and that positioning should drive the product strategy. And you know what? That might be true if we're talking about consumer products or other kind of products that I don't work on. But if we're talking about enterprise technology, I don't believe that positioning drives product strategy. That is actually the tail wagging the dog, if you know what I mean. Like so here's the way I look at this. In most technology companies, what we have is a vision for the product, a vision of what that thing is going to look like in the future. And for B2B enterprise tech, that vision of what the thing is ultimately going to look like, if we're talking about like if we're at a startup, that vision is very different from what the product is today. Very, very different. So, I'll give you an example. I worked at a company, and our vision was the ultimate instantiation of this product was going to be an omni-channel backend for retailers. So everything you do, everything a retailer does on the website, everything a retailer does in the store, this thing is going to be the back end for all of that. So you can give this seamless customer experience. Doesn't matter what you're doing online or in the store, it all works nice together. It's all perfect. Now, that's the vision. Then we have the crappy thing that it actually is today, which is not that. And so, but the vision is 10 years from now and involves a lot of development work and a lot of things. And so we have the thing that we're starting with, which looks a little bit more like step one in that vision. And so for us at that particular product I was at, step one in that vision was a mobility solution for sales associates inside the store. This is a very different thing than
No.
the big vision, but I can sell this today, and we have this today. And it actually looks good. It delivers a bunch of value today, and I can build a sales pitch for that thing that I have today, and I have it, but I'm positioning it in the market today as a sales associate tablet. Now, the vision says I'm going to be this big omni-channel backend thing. That's really different. So how do we get there? Well, there's a strategy to get
Mhm.
there. And the strategy says, well, first we'll build this sales associate tablet thing. And then we're going to add on a bunch of functionality. So part of that is checkout and a cash register basically. So it'll do point of sale, and then we're going to add clienteling, and it's going to do all these great things around clienteling. And then after that, we're going to add a bunch of things beyond that, and then a bunch of things beyond that, and then ultimately we become this back end thing forever.
Yeah.
And so that's the strategy. The strategy is we'll start here, then we'll add these things, will be this, then we'll add these things, will be this, and then eventually will be the big thing that the vision is.
Yeah.
Now, that's the strategy. There is a product strategy that goes with that the product team is working on to build all these things we need to get from point A to point B. Positioning does not define that. So if I look at what am I actually selling to a customer at each step along the way, I'm selling the thing I have today, not the big vision thing. I'm selling the thing I have today. So in the case of this thing, we were out there selling a sales associate tablet. We were not talking about omni-channel. We were talking about that. That would just confuse the customer because we didn't have it.
Yeah.
But the product team knew that's where we were going.
Yeah.
Now, do we interact with the product team to figure out our positioning? Yes, because I mean, it's important for the product team to understand that at every step in that journey, I have to have a product that stands on its own that wins in the market. And that is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
So in every step, we need to say, okay, well, here we're going to be a sales associate tablet, and this is how we're going to win. Oh, but when we get here, we're something different, and this is how we're going to win here. And when we get here, we're something different, and here's how we're going to win here. And product and marketing need to be working tightly together on this to make sure that at every step we understand, okay, once we get here, the positioning is going to turn into this, and this is how we're going to win at that step.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's product strategy is what gets us from today to the vision. Positioning is more about maximizing our ability to make money with the product we have today in the market it exists in today against the competitors we have today, with the full knowledge that a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that's going to change because we have a vision that's different and a product strategy that is moving us through a set of phases.
Yeah.
So I think people get this wrong. Like what I hear is people trying to do this thing where they figure out the positioning, which is where they win right now, and then try to build a product strategy that does nothing but strengthen that position.
Yeah.
Now that may work in the short term if your positioning is really good, but you run the risk of a competitor leapfrogging you in the future that has a bigger vision to go somewhere else. That then comes along and says, that's the old way of doing this thing. That's all very nice that you have that, but we have this other thing that is way different. It also makes it almost impossible to raise money. Like if you're a venture-backed startup, it's very difficult to raise money if you don't have some kind of bigger vision of how you're going to be this bigger, broader thing, which is almost always way beyond the thing that we're selling in the market today. So I think it's very backwards to think about positioning driving product strategy. I don't think that's it at all. I think, we have a product strategy that defines a set of steps between where we are today, where we want to be in the future. And at each of those steps, we need to have a position that defines how do we win in the market when we're at this step that's going to enable us to make the money that's going to get us to the next step.
Yeah. I have two branches of questions to that, but the first one, I think it relates to that last part that you said, because you are saying it in two different ways. The first one saying, hey, the positioning we have today is not driving the product strategy, which is kind of looking at the future, but the milestones, for lack of a better word, that the strategy will get us to should have a positioning that we should understand. Because if you're, let me rephrase that, if you're going with a milestone that will not win in the market, then your strategy will fail anyways, because you will not have how to position. That's interesting.
That's right.
So there is
often what we're doing as we're moving through those things is we're expanding out from the place where we're winning today. So I'll give you another example. So another company I worked at, we had this vision that we were a CRM system, and our vision was eventually we were going to be a CRM for big enterprises. So we were going to be the dominant CRM for big enterprises. Now, at the time, there was a big company that was already the dominant CRM for enterprises, and they had a very mature, robust product. They were doing 2 billion in revenue. They had 8,000 employees. I mean, we weren't just going to show up as 20 people in a little office and say, "Oh no, ours is better than that." I mean, and we actually attempted that at the beginning. But instead, what we had was eventually what we had was the plan to get there. And so the strategy was we were going to start in banking and specifically investment banking. So we had built a product that had specific features that the big leader in the market did not have that were very valuable to investment bankers on the sales side. And so we originally sold into investment banking and did a very good job of selling into investment banking and made quite a bit of money in there. The strategy, however, was once we dominated investment banking, what we were doing was we were building out functionality to enable us to go after retail banking.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next plan was, okay, right now we're the best CRM on the planet for investment banking. We're CRM for investment banking. But the plan was we'd get to step 2, and step 2 we would be CRM for banking, retail and investment. So, we
That's big.
just expand the
Mm-hmm.
circle a little bit. And so because we're already the winners there, we figure we could expand the
Yeah.
circle and be the winners there. And then while we're winning in that market, we are building out functionality for insurance. Insurance is a massive market. It's adjacent to retail banking. In some ways, it overlaps, but it's adjacent. And the idea is, okay, once we get there and we have this functionality and we could serve insurance, now we're going to be CRM for financial services. And
Mm-hmm.
that's going to cover retail, investment
That's,
banking, and insurance. And then the thinking was, well, that's a huge market. And if we manage to do that, now we're big enough that we could actually challenge the leader. So if we
yeah.
were dominating in investment banking, then we could start getting into all these other areas. And
Yeah.
then we could reposition ourselves as enterprise CRM, full stop, and go after that market.
Yeah.
You'll see that in enterprise software often. What you'll see is companies will start in one market and then they'll use their success in that market to stretch into others. And in some cases, they will even eventually abandon the original market they were
Mm.
in as they stretch into other markets. You see this in software companies. Is very often companies will start in the mid market because it's underserved by the market leader. And there'll be a market leader that's doing really well in enterprise. Company will come in mid market and then will slowly crawl its way up
Yeah.
to these bigger enterprise customers, which is exactly what Salesforce ended up doing to Siebel. They
Mm.
came in very low at the low
Mm.
end of the market and then eventually climbed their way up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Siebel sort of killed themselves off. But by the time Siebel was getting acquired by Oracle and sort of exiting the market, Salesforce was already doing these bigger deals in these bigger markets. But they started down at the bottom where Siebel didn't care, and that part of the market was underserved, and then crawled their way up to being the giant company they are today. And I would argue they don't particularly sell, or they don't particularly serve the needs of the low end of the market very well today at all.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of other better choices down there. But for mid market and above,
That's,
they've concentrated their efforts there.
yeah. Yeah. So challenging a bit what just now with what you said before seems to be like the not the current position in driving strategy, but the future position you want to achieve. That will probably drive your product strategy. So if you want to kind of
Yeah,
go from financial banking to retail banking, then you need to figure
yeah.
out what's the strategy to get to that to win that market.
That's right. And I would describe that more as a vision than
Okay.
positioning, right?
Okay. Got
Like
it.
there's a vision that says, like if I'm Salesforce, right? There's a vision that says I'm going to do everything related to customers, which is that customer 360 thing they talk about now. So I'm going to do everything related to customers, including marketing, service, chat, everything related to customers, so that we have this complete 360-degree view over what's going on the commercial side of our business related to customers. But the steps in, and in their case,
Yeah.
the steps is, well, we'll start with the CRM, then we'll do service, then we'll do marketing, then we'll make some acquisitions and we'll get Slack and MuleSoft and whatever. And then, and then eventually we'll be this thing. So the vision was kind of driving this. There were steps in the vision and steps in that and positioning that map to that. But
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
I think that's sort of a vision thing and not so much a positioning thing.
Yeah, we're getting into small semantics there anyway, so
Yeah,
it's fine.
yeah. But I think it matters because, again, like what I hear is I see people writing about this and talking about this in a backwards way. Like, I don't think we should take the positioning today and then say, oh, well, if this is the positioning today, therefore this is what our roadmap should be. That's backwards.
Yeah.
That's
But
backwards.
that goes to my second branch of questions, because I think that we are talking from the nice perspective that position is working. So we are being able to tell a story that people
Oh,
is
yeah.
buying. But I assume, and not sure, but I assume that some companies don't
Oh,
find the
yeah.
positioning because they don't have the strengths to actually kind of be the best at
Totally.
something. And
Yeah.
so maybe first
Well,
question is,
like
yeah.
what you see, what I see a lot is one of two things happen. So sometimes what you've got is the fantastic vision of what this thing is going to be way in the future. Um, it's a good example of this Magic Leap. You remember Magic
No.
Leap? This it was a very big deal when it launched. It was the first product that got us really thinking about augmented reality. So they launched a teaser trailer of what this technology could do, and there was a video of a guy with his hand out and it's super realistic elephant on his hand, and everybody went crazy. They're like, "This is amazing!" And they raised an astronomical amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they eventually released a consumer headset. But it didn't do anything. Like, nobody knew what to do with it.
Use
Developers didn't
case.
know what to do with it. Nobody really understood what to do with it. There was great confusion in the land. Everybody was very excited about the potential of the technology, but what they didn't have was that first step of, so what are we going to sell? Like, what are the steps? Like, I think everyone was clear on the vision, but the first step was not well defined of how do we enter the market. And so, again, they were talking about the vision. It got everybody excited about the vision, but then it was very hard to bring everybody back down and say, but no, we're just going to sell this. And so in the end, and I haven't kept up with them a lot, so somebody from Magic Leap is going to come up and say you're wrong. But the last I looked at their stuff, they had made a pivot into B2B, doing some very interesting augmented reality stuff for manufacturing or whatever. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And you can see that there's a business need for that. There's a place where people are selling stuff there. I'm assuming they're doing okay. They're still in business. And that makes a lot more sense. And that's also why you don't hear about them anymore. They're not selling a consumer thing. And I think there's a mistake sometimes of going too hard on the vision. So people are like, wow, flying cars. And you're like, yeah, but right now all you get is a Segway, and the gap is too big.
Yeah.
And so the vision is something that, like, you sell it to the investors, you keep it internally, but it's not necessarily the thing you're marketing out to the market. But what you're marketing to the market is the thing that you have to sell. Again, right now,
Yeah.
you can only sell what's on the truck. So positioning the thing that's on the truck so you can sell right now is super important. So that's one way I think people fail.
Yeah.
The second way is, the old fashioned way where people have an idea for a product. They have an idea for maybe what the vision is going to be, and maybe they're raising some money on that. But they've got the initial product that they're going to release, and their assumptions are just wrong. Like, they assume, like, so they attempt to position in the market and they say, hey, we assume these are the competitors. We assume this is the value we can deliver that the competitors can't. We assume these kind of companies are going to love it. And, we did our homework, we interviewed we did customer discovery, we interviewed potential clients, and then we launched the thing. And you know what? It didn't work out.
Yeah.
And it was because we had assumptions baked in there that we didn't know. Like,
Yeah.
it turned out there was a different competitor that we weren't thinking about, that customers actually compare us to, or the thing we thought was going to be really valuable for a certain kind of customer, it turns out it's not. Like, they just
Yeah.
say it's going to be valuable, but then when you get it and you want them to pay, they don't want to pay. Or the target market that you thought was going to be really great for this thing just isn't interested, but it turns out there's another target market that is, but they need
Mhm.
a slightly different product. So then we got to go back to the drawing board. So I think figuring out that initial offering that gets you into the market, that makes you successful, I mean, that's not easy. If that was easy, we wouldn't be sitting on podcasts and
90% of startup fail and all the things that we know.
yeah,
And
we'd
actually,
be on the beach drinking out of a coconut. Like, we wouldn't have to talk about this stuff. Like, this stuff is hard.
and actually, you frame it as a company doing customer discovery and all these beautiful things that not all of them do. Let's put it away.
A
So,
lot of them don't,
okay.
right? A lot of them,
Exactly.
a lot of them just have a neat idea. They're like, "Hey, I got a neat thing." What we're seeing right now in AI, there's a
Mm.
lot of that. It's a lot of people really excited about the potential of the technology. The potential is massive. And saying, "Hey, here's a thing we could do. Let's see if we can sell that." And then it turns out, nobody
Yeah.
wants that.
Yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't
it's
actually
similar.
solve a problem. It doesn't do a thing.
Yeah.
So I'm taking calls with a lot of companies that have a thing, and it's kind of neat,
Mhm.
but there is no real commercial potential in it right now. Maybe there
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
in the future. Um,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people just messing around with the technology because it's cool, but it's not necessarily a product that's been built to solve a particular business need.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I
It's
think we
same
still
case
have
that.
to build products to solve business problems
Yeah.
if we want to actually sell stuff. Not just because, hey, it would be cool if we had this. It's like, okay, but what am I going to use it for? Like, how does that help my business make money? How does that help my business save money? Like, a lot of people come to me and they've got some neat, like, chatbot thing, and I'm like, it's kind of cool. Like, it's kind of cool. You could ask it a question, it gives you an answer. But then I'm like, why would anyone pay for it though? Like, what's it? How's it changed my life? Like it's neat as an experiment, but and if you're selling to businesses, that bar is higher, right? Like, how's this going to help my business make money? How's this going to help my business save money? If you can't answer that question, you're not there yet.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I think it's related to the augmented reality example you mentioned before. And if we go back to Web 3.0 and things like that, so whenever it's a new technology or these waves of excitement are going on.
Yeah, there's usually, like, this is, these guys Gartner group, they have this thing called the hype cycle. And whenever there's this breakthrough new technology that comes out, we go through something with that they call the peak of inflated expectations.
That says a lot.
And then which is followed by the trough of disillusionment. And so I think for a lot of AI technology, we are definitely in the peak of inflated expectations right now. And a lot of what we know is going to come with this AI technology, it's not going to come in the timeframes we wish it did or we're expecting it to. Like a lot of things, like
Yeah,
we had the same thing when we went through 4G cellular was a big change. Like, I mean, with 3G, there's just so much stuff you couldn't do on your phone, you just wouldn't even bother, right?
yeah,
Now we got 4G, and it's like, wow, I got a big fat internet pipe in the sky. It changed everything. Like that, like there's all kinds of stuff we can do on our phone because of that. But it didn't change right away.
yeah,
It didn't change right away, even though we all had it. Not everybody had it right away, and not all the phones supported it right away. And then, the developers were a bit like, okay, what do I do with it right away? And what are the boundaries of this? And exactly how much can I push around with this thing? And then, and so it took us a while to get to the full potential of 4G. Now we have 5G, but, it took us a while to get to the full potential of it. Same thing with the shift to the cloud. Like, we've had cloud technology very long time, um, but there were all the things around shifting things to the cloud, including human perceptions of it and the perception of risk in it and all this other stuff that took us a very long time to actually realized the full potential of what we saw of the potential of cloud decades ago.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff we are just realizing now, even though the technology was there, we were ready, it was good to go. There's no reason we don't, except all this stuff around the
Yeah.
edges. I think we're going to see the same thing with AI. My guess is it's going to move faster. You know,
Yeah.
some of these things do, and that technology seems to be evolving very quickly. Um, but I think we're still figuring out where the edges on this stuff are. Like, where is it really useful, like today,
Yeah.
versus where is it just potentially useful? And we're not quite
Mm.
there yet. And it's going to be 3 years or 4 years or
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah.
And that's coming later. So I think we're
Yeah.
still trying to figure that out.
But that's a good way to, I mean, regardless of being a new technology or an old technology, but going back to the example in which the position just doesn't work because you got your assumptions wrong,
Yeah.
how do you see the connection there? Because at the end of the day, my thought is that you need to build a positioning or create a positioning pitch that then you can build your product to match that. Basically, what you were saying, hey, if that doesn't work, then you need to figure out what needs to work. So in that case, how do you see maybe we can frame it from the collaboration between marketing and
Sure.
product, saying, hey, this is what we need to say, and how we
Yeah.
build something that we can set that
That's
frame?
right. So I'll take you back to my retail example. So in the retail example, the vision was always this big deal thing. Like we actually, because the founder was a second time founder, and so he was known in the community. He raised money before he had a real first product. So he went out, sold the vision. Everybody's like, "That sounds good. You seem like the right guy to do it. Here's some money." So he's got a little bit of money to go build it. But then he's got to figure out, well, what's the first thing that we build? And so we were having conversations with customers about this omni-channel back end, all singing, all dancing thing. And it became very clear that even if we could build that thing right away, it would be very hard to sell. So then we started thinking about, all right, well, with the technology we've built already, what would be a good starting point? And so we did flesh out a positioning thesis. And the positioning thesis was, well, it'd be easier to sell on the in-store side than the e-commerce side, because the e-commerce technology was all new and good over there. And on the in-store side, everything's terrible. So we said, okay, we'll sell something in store. And then, in talking to folks, it seemed like there were a bunch of real problems there. So one of the problems was um, where a customer does their research online, they come into the store to look at something, particularly a big ticket purchase. They come in, they look at something, and I think they call this showrooming, where they come in, they look at something, and then they go online, they find it somewhere cheaper, and then they buy it there. And so the stores are really worried about this, because they're like,
Mm.
Amazon's going to eat our lunch. Like, we need the store to be able to provide some value in this process. So the thesis was, what if we gave them a tablet that would enable them, the sales associate, when the customer comes in, to do that process there and say, look, let's look online. Here's what they're charging for all of this. And oh, yeah, these guys are $10 cheaper. We'll match that price,
Mm.
and
Then,
we'll do the deal right here in the store right now. Don't leave.
nice.
So
Nice.
that was the
It's a good
thesis.
starting point.
And so we built to that thesis,
Yeah.
and then we tested it with customers. Now, a lot of what we learned once we got the product out there was, what kind of products does that really work for? Well, it works better if you have a product that's kind of complicated, a little bit more expensive, something that
Mm.
people are really stressed about.
Yeah.
So we worked with a big company that sold baby goods, and like baby strollers and car seats fit that perfectly, because you're a first time parent, you don't know how to buy a car seat, you don't know
Need to
what's
see it.
important or not important in a car seat, you don't know what a car seat costs, you never bought one before, and like, if you don't want to get this wrong, the baby's gonna die.
High stakes.
So we sold this thing, for that. The other kind of customers we were talking to were things where, the customer was really, the sales associate's advice would really matter to them. And so anyway, so we learned that after we launched, and then we adjusted the positioning to take that into account. So we started with a positioning thesis that said, here's this. We we fleshed out the product so that we could fully deliver that thesis.
Yeah.
And then we did some adjustments there because, we didn't get it perfect first
Yeah.
try, because you never do. So then we made some adjustments and built some stuff. And then once we had that, then we were thinking about the next thing.
Yeah.
Then we were like, what would be really powerful is if we had point of sale on that tablet so we could ring the person out right there. We need that. That'll be the next step. And that's on
Nice.
our trip to
Yeah.
getting to be the big back end thing. The second thing was we were doing a lot of stuff with fashion brands,
Mm.
and they have a thing called clienteling where, for really good loyal customers that buy a lot of stuff from them at very high end stores, they actually do this like personal shopper sort of experience. And if we could do clienteling, they would love this thing as well. And so that put those things on the next steps in our roadmap on the way to delivering. The vision was the same, but where we were successful sort of determined where we were going to go next and how the path. So the path did change a little bit as we got more experience with customers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, I mean that goes back to that. I love the framing of the position hypothesis, because at the end of the day, I think that should inform the strategy. Or if said another way, the strategy is trying to bring your product to a different level, and that
That's
level
right.
should be positionable. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Maybe one related question to that is, and maybe from the expansion perspective we're mentioning before, for example, from with the banking example and things like that, how do you see the input from product into that process? And what I'm trying to say is that probably from the
Yeah.
product perspective, you either know, hey, maybe building this set of features it's easier, or you have some contact with customers and what the bigger pains or things like that. So how do you see that
Yeah.
collaboration happening?
Well, so in that case, there was a lot of back and forth with product because there were a lot of things that we would have loved to deliver in that first version that, they're just going to take too long to build, too
Yeah.
complicated, too whatever, not enough bang for our buck. Like there was a constant, like I think when you're in particularly the early phases of a product, trying to figure out the thing you're going to deliver in the market, what's going to win, what's the next thing going to be, there's a lot of trade-offs you have to make, like in terms of what you want to build versus what's possible to build and the time frame to build it. And so the big thing we were trying to figure out is what could we deliver that had enough, like could we deliver something with enough functionality that the customer would pay for it
Yeah.
so that we could stay alive to build the next thing.
Yeah.
And so that involved a lot of back and forth. That involved us working with our early customers deeply, and then
Mm.
a lot of back and forth with product saying like, okay, customers are saying they need this thing, and product saying, well, that's going to be hard and difficult. And then we're like, well, is there another way we could deliver something that would deliver
Mm.
that value that maybe isn't quite so complicated to build? And how would we put this on the roadmap? So there was a lot of thrashing on that in the early days, which I think is very typical in
Yeah.
a product in this phase.
Love it.
At some point you get more mature and the things start being somewhat easier in that your big things are mapped out on the roadmap, and we're more tuning to smaller stuff. We know more
Mm.
about customers, we know what they value, what they don't value, we know what we can sell and what we can't sell. And so a lot of this stuff
So
gets
nice.
easier, but at the beginning there's a lot of thrashing
Yeah.
because we just don't know yet.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point, because what I find typically is, like, especially scale up, so big organization, more established, already product market fit, making a profit.
Yeah.
This discussion of, okay, what's our next milestone? So I said maybe the next big thing, or where we want to grow, is highly opinionated. And I mean, of course, the typical scenario is we have many opportunities, and those opportunities are very or opinions around those opportunities vary a lot, and there is no a structured way to decide. So does this match with what you have seen?
Here's what I think it helps to have a very solid, well constructed vision of what the end goal is, of like where you really want to go. If you don't have that, then it's impossible to make decisions because
That makes a
everything
lot of
sounds
sense.
good.
Unfortunately, not that
And
many
so in
have
the
vision.
companies that I've worked at that have been really successful, there's been a founder or a
Mm.
CEO or an executive with a very big vision, and everything gets held up to that vision. Instead of saying, "Oh, we're going to build this thing because customer A, B, and C want it," versus we're going to build a thing because we're trying to get to this goal in the future.
Yeah.
And if we don't build these things in this order, we will never reach that goal. And so there needs to be some discipline around that.
Yeah.
Again, I'm
How
not an
about
expert. I'm not an
no,
expert in product strategy, so you shouldn't ask me these questions. You should go
no, no,
back
no,
and
no,
ask
but makes a lot of sense.
Marty Kagan will tell you all about that stuff. This is not my area of expertise at all.
He was
But
here
I'm
two
just
episodes
telling you
ago, so
from my personal experience, it particularly in enterprise software, it is very, very easy to give up all your strategic roadmap items to service a noisy big
yeah,
customer that just wants a couple little things.
yeah.
And the
Typical.
next thing you know, you've built a product that doesn't really work for anybody except one or two big customers,
Yeah,
and you get beat by a competitor with better vision that leapfrogs you
yeah.
because they had the discipline to stick to, we're trying to get to this goal. Here's the stages we're going to go through to get there.
That's super amazing. That's a very important note for everyone. One interesting question to that point is, I mean, when you go and start kind of working with companies as you are doing now as a consultant, do they usually have a vision, or do you ask them to build
Yeah.
a vision if they don't? They do have a vision.
Yeah, I mean, most of them do. Most of the companies I'm
Interesting.
working with have venture backing, and so it's really hard to
They need
raise
to.
venture
Yeah,
money without
if you don't have
a
vision. Yeah,
vision.
makes sense.
It's very difficult. Some of the companies I work with are quite big, um, and because they're so large, um, a lot of what they're doing doesn't feel like we're going through these big steps. But even in those cases, they have a longer term idea of where this thing eventually goes. And like I say, I'm there as the positioning person, and we're not talking about that. What we're concerned with is how do we make the money today that funds that?
Perfect.
Like, and so often these companies get so wrapped up in worrying about the future that they can't sell the stuff,
Yes.
the thing they've got right now. Like and a lot of times I'm in there to break through that noise. In particular, I will tell you, like, here's what I get from the product teams. Often we'll get in a discussion about positioning, and I'll say, who does this product compete with? Now, you think that's a pretty straightforward question, right? We should be able to
Yes.
answer that. And you would be amazed at the answers you get and how different they are around the room.
Yeah.
And often what you'll get is if you ask sales, sales will say, well, we compete with ABC, and it'll be the companies that end up on the short list with them, the companies that we lose to occasionally, this kind of thing. Uh, Sales will never say we lost to the status quo solution or we lost to manual labor or we lost to a spreadsheet,
Mm.
even though we lose to those probably half the time. But sales doesn't consider that a loss. They'll say, we'll get them later, which is
You
a
remain
good
the
way
hope.
for this is healthy thinking for your sales team, by the way. I think this is good. But we need to understand that we are also competing with those
Yeah,
other things.
yeah,
But if
yeah.
I go to the product team and say, who do we compete with? I very often what I get is a huge list of companies,
Mm, mm,
absolutely giant.
mhm,
And half of them I'll say, well, okay, this one, sales. Have you ever seen them in a deal? Sales like, no, I have no idea who that is. And product will say, oh, you won't see them yet, but you're gonna
mm.
because they're building some stuff. And I read their press release and I looked at their website and they look just like us, and we're gonna see them eventually. And it's like, and
Yeah,
it's our job
yeah.
in positioning to say that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Those are ghosts. We don't
Yeah.
need to position against anything that a customer never puts on a short list. Now, if 2 years from now they start showing up on a short list and we start losing deals to them, fine.
Yeah.
Then we'll adjust our positioning to compensate for that.
Yeah.
But if they're not causing us any pain right now and we don't see them in deals right now, we don't have to worry about positioning against them.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is a different way of thinking about this. Product is often, like you say,
Exactly.
way ahead in the future. But when we're
Yeah.
doing positioning work, like we can't sell things that are just in our
Yeah.
minds. We can
Yeah.
only sell what's on the truck. So when we do positioning work, we have to get very oriented in the present day and
Yeah.
say, how do we win a deal right now?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of
Let's
sense.
figure that out. And that's often a mind shift for folks on the product team because they're worried about how do we win a deal 5 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it makes sense in terms of you are building. I mean, the current product is probably what you need to optimize, but then what you need to build is actually the next milestones. Is what we talk about the position
Yeah.
hypothesis for the future product. So it makes there is a
Yeah.
tension there in between the two words, which makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Well, I feel like, it may be this unpopular opinion with the product folks, but I feel like one of the jobs of the product team is to be able to communicate to sales, marketing, and everybody else. What do we got that's better than the other folks right now? And a lot of times that is a gap. And so
Mm-hmm.
you'll talk to marketing and like what you'll get are products teams that are building stuff for the future and they'll get so concerned about the problems with the product that they're trying to fix that in their head the product is terrible. Today's product is terrible. It's just awful. It'll be great in 5 years once we fix all those things. But the thing we have now, yeah, it's bad. If it wasn't bad, we wouldn't have to build this 5 years worth of stuff to fix it. And then you know what happens is that negativity then spreads around to the company and it's
Yeah.
poison. So
Yeah.
what you'll get is the sales team saying, well, yeah, I talked to the product guys and they said this was terrible and whatever. And you'll be like, well, hold up. Against these two companies, is it
Yeah.
terrible? And even product will admit, oh no, we're better than
Hey.
them. But this other list of companies I'm worried about, yeah, we're worse than them. And it's like, dude,
That's super interesting. That's super interesting.
we need to give sales some stuff they can work with here. And we need
Yeah.
to be making sure that, in our quest to make the product better, we're not being unnecessarily hard on the current product against the current actual competitors that we see. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes product team can fall into that trap.
And I think that relates to what we were talking before. I mean, we don't have that clarity on, hey, this is our current positioning, this is our positioning in milestone one, our positioning in milestone two, and then we can,
Right.
if we have that mental model that kind of presented here, you can
Yeah,
actually split that negativity and kind of say, hey, we're great for this topic right now, right, right
that's
with its
right.
competitors, and then in the future we will become better this other thing. It's a nice mental model to follow through. April, since we are reaching the top of the hour, one of my typical last question is: what's one interesting learning you had along the way between this connection between strategy and positioning that we haven't covered?
Hmm. I think, I was surprised in the work that I'm doing with companies on positioning. I was surprised at how frequently the product teams were unaware of the current competitive situation on the ground. That really surprised me. And I feel like a lot of product teams are just not spending enough time with sales. And there is great value in product really understanding how customers think and how they behave in a sales process.
Yeah,
I think a lot of product teams, again, they're very oriented in the future. So they're thinking about the things we're going to build in the future and how this is going to work. And they're talking to customers, but they're not necessarily talking to customers in the process of making a purchase. They're often talking to customers after they've purchased and they know a lot of stuff and whatever. Um, Whereas I think it's quite interesting when you get product teams that are quite in sync with the sales team, there's this deeper level of understanding of how a customer makes trade-offs in their mind when they're making a purchase decision. And those trade-offs are often very irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And those trade-offs are like, yeah, I know you guys do this thing way better, but you seem kind of risky and the other guys don't. Or I know you guys do this thing, but what if this happens? The customers are very worried about risk.
Yeah.
And we don't often consider that when we're building things and we're thinking about how things roll out. We're not often deeply considering how much a customer is afraid of messing up when they make a decision to purchase. And so I think that's been a surprising learning for me, that I think on the product side, we need to make sure that we're spending enough time with sales that we really understand how a customer makes a purchase decision and what are the things that can throw a deal off because a customer is just scared or uncertain or feels like something is risky. And what are the things we can do on the product side to make that easier for customers and to make the whole purchase process seem less stressful.
Yeah. And goes back to what you're saying, that the kind of the risk avoidance goes back to kind of losing to the status quo and to Excel.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, this has been wonderful, full of insights. Where can people find you and what can they do to support your work?
Sure. I'm at aprildunford.com. And, if you want to follow me on social media, LinkedIn is the only place where I'm really active. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. But and if you, if you're interested in going deep on positioning stuff, there's a couple of resources. Like obviously the books are a great place to start. I have a podcast called Positioning with April Dunford, and you can check that out. It's like really for positioning nerds. Like if you want to geek out on the positioning stuff, you could go there. And there's a newsletter that goes with that, which you can find on my website, or it's aprildunford.substack.com, and you can check that out there.
Awesome. I will put links to all of that. And Thanks again for sharing all your knowledge today.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.